You all have met Rafa, I think, perhaps, or maybe I know we have some new people.
Yeah.
But Rafa is going to take the lead on our discussion with Drew today. He was very kindly joining us. And then we'll do like 45 minutes or, whatever you feel, but anytime people can chime in and ask questions. Drew is just a wealth of knowledge on all things Bitcoin, and we're very lucky to have him. And then we can also save some time for save some time for Q&A after as well.
Yeah.
But
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Drew, for joining us today. And yeah, I thought we could start with just a kicking off question. And maybe could you share your journey into Bitcoin? What sparked your interest in the space, and how did it evolve into leadership roles at Galaxy Digital and then Cathedra Bitcoin?
Yeah, totally. And by the way, is my how's the lighting for you guys? Is this all right, or do I look like too much of a serial killer?
It looks fine. It looks good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes you never know with the new Zoom location if you're gonna end up looking like a serial killer. So it's great to meet you guys, and thanks again for having me. Yeah, honestly, it's amazing that you guys have this club. By the way, also Ella, thank you for inviting me as well. It's awesome that you guys have a Bitcoin club, by the way. So I guess to start my background, I went to school at University of Chicago. Many moons ago, actually, I applied to Cornell. I didn't get into Cornell. I did get into U Chicago. And there was certainly nothing like a Bitcoin club at that time. I graduated in 2017. I studied economics and philosophy. And despite studying economics at U Chicago, we basically never learned about anything other in terms of macro other than optimizing the money supply, which I've come to detest. So that was my background. I went into investment banking at first. As I said, I graduated in 2017. So as soon as I hit the desk in the summer of 2017, I realized how much I hated my life. If anyone is an aspiring investment banker, you can feel free to DM me with any questions you have afterwards. But I think it's a mistake everyone has the right to make. But I certainly didn't go into banking for the right reasons. I kind of just wanted to live in New York, make good money. And it seemed like what the quote successful people were doing in college. But I realized immediately that that was basically a mistake. I ended up getting into Bitcoin basically immediately after because, I was basically reading online for anything that was more interesting than investment banking. There are many things, but Bitcoin really caught my eye because number was going up in 2017. Ended up going down the rabbit hole while I was in banking, sneaking in Medium articles while I was at my desk on the trading floor. And then I ended up leaving that job. I went to go work at a company called Galaxy Digital because one of my old friends who I grew up with, we went to elementary, middle, and high school together. He was at Galaxy Digital, or had just started at Galaxy Digital, pulled me in after him. And so while we were there, at first we were working the investment banking and the venture teams there. The venture team wasn't very sexy though. It was run by a guy who wasn't into crypto, let alone Bitcoin. And it was mostly, investing in really lame companies like Backed, if you've heard of them, no disrespect. It's the company that Donald Trump has now said he might be buying soon. But me and my buddy were there. We were two Bitcoin maximalists. We were trying to figure out what we could work on that was related to Bitcoin. And from the investment banking side, miners always need more money. And so we got into Bitcoin mining basically by trying to help miners raise money. We then ended up convincing Galaxy to start lending to miners and then start investing in some Bitcoin mining machines themselves. We then recruited who used to be the old head of mining at Galaxy Digital, a woman by the name of Amanda Fabiano. She's a great follow on Bitcoin mining Twitter if you're interested. So we did that for a year. I was running an ASIC leasing desk. ASIC is basically like the Bitcoin mining computers, effectively. We did that for another year. And then me and my buddy left to just go start our own company. We were kind of tired of working at a shitcoin casino, tired of the corporate life, and we were thinking we were ready to go do Bitcoin mining ourselves. But about a week later, we got recruited by a friend of ours named Marty Bent. If you're on Bitcoin Twitter, you will be familiar with him, or maybe you've listened to his podcast, Tales from the Crypt. He's a great guy. And we basically got recruited to come run this publicly traded mining company instead of starting our own. And that all sounded lovely, but then we had to go deal with, running a Bitcoin mining business in the public markets, which has been quite interesting. At first, we were really focused on doing flare gas mining. If you've heard of that, basically, Bitcoin mining in the oil field using waste methane that comes out of the oil wells, and using that, which is basically an otherwise wasted form of energy to mine Bitcoin. But as basically everything unfolded, that ended up being kind of the right strategy at the wrong time. And so going into 2022 in the bear market, as FTX was blowing up, we basically, we kind of had to hit pause on our operations with the flare gas side of things. I was actually living in northern New Hampshire at the time, building a manufacturing facility to develop these modular data centers that would go out in the oil field. We call them Bitcoin mining rovers. I still love that name, but economically it stopped making sense. And so we basically pivoted more to on-grid. And then recently, earlier this year, we acquired a hosting data center business. These guys can basically build Bitcoin mining data centers quite cheaply and a decent cost of power. And so, yeah, we closed on that merger in summer of this last year. And now we're basically looking to get listed on NASDAQ, et cetera, et cetera. I'm happy to answer any questions. I know I brushed over just my like Bitcoin maximalism there, but I've basically written at length about why I think Bitcoin is basically the greatest asset of our lifetime and sort of this world-changing technology on par with the internet. I've also written a bunch about Bitcoin mining and energy, and particularly how Bitcoin mining does not waste energy, and really the importance of energy in our society is sort of this foundational commodity that we all depend on. And then, more recently, been thinking a lot about some of the stuff going on in public markets as well, and in kind of the new macro landscape. But yeah, it's great to chat with you guys, and I'm happy to answer whatever questions you have.
Yeah, thank you for the overview. So you touched upon this a little bit, but Bitcoin has gone through numerous cycles of skepticism and celebration, and recently Bitcoin has surged 38% in the past 2 weeks following the US election. How do you interpret this price movement, and how would you describe Bitcoin's current state in the market and its potential for growth?
Yeah, so my honest answer is when I think about this price movement, it's inevitable. So with Satoshi Nakamoto basically just came up with an asset that there would only ever be 21 million of. And I think what we're basically going to see through these, bull markets, bear markets over the next, as we've seen over the last 15 years, I think as we're going to continue to see over the next few decades, people are just going to wake up to the fact that really, in the words of Michael Saylor, there is no second best. And it's just sort of like it's this black hole of value in a way, because it's tradable 24/7, 365. And so if someone has the choice between, say, like I'm sure you have many friends who trade, equities on Robinhood and stuff like that. For me, I'm just like, who wants to live their life like that? Or to me, it sounds exhausting. Bitcoin is just like the only place that I could ever think of putting money in. And I think in addition to being this great financial investment, it also, one of the reasons why it is such a great financial investment is its decentralized nature. The fact that it empowers people around the world. Maybe if they have even if they live in countries with despotic regimes that inflate the shit out of the money supply. Bitcoin is this tool that allows everyone anywhere in the world to store their wealth, to transfer their wealth, functionally speaking, instantly around the world. And I think it's just like to me, it just feels so obvious that, I think obviously 100K will be a huge milestone, but for me, it seems inevitable that we'll be at, $1 million per Bitcoin, $10 million per Bitcoin. So I think there's a ton of upside left. And I think there's just so much interesting stuff going on there. It's it feels to me like this recent rally is only the beginning.
Yeah. So you've emphasized a lot on it being one of the greatest investment assets. I was wondering, how do you see it transforming industries or societies globally? I know you mentioned the aspect of being decentralized, but do you have any other points regarding that?
Yeah, I guess maybe by quick show of hands, how many of you guys are on Twitter or X or whatever? How many of you would say you are on Bitcoin Twitter or follow Bitcoin Twitter people? Okay, so because basically that will help me calibrate my answer if I should just throw out some random names. But given the hands, I'm gonna keep it maybe more foundational. So I think there are a couple big things that it changes. So I think one, if we think about like the way the global economy works today, is the dollar is the global reserve currency. And raise your hand if anyone's heard of Bretton Woods. Okay. So yeah, basically in the pre-Bretton Woods world order, you had this like free market for currencies where different countries at different times had the strongest currency. Those currencies tended to be backed by countries that, maybe had a lot of gold. In a lot of cases, there was the currencies were just backed by gold. And so the call it like foreign exchange market was really just like, okay, the British pound is backed by this much gold. The French franc is backed by this much gold. And so it was really just like a trivial process of unit conversion. Um, Obviously, at various points in history, there were currencies that were backed by gold that the government then decided that they wanted to maybe inflate their currency, or maybe they sold their gold without really telling people and things like this. And so they're basically inflation has kind of always been a human temptation. And so eventually, these currencies would be found out as being less strong than we had thought they were, than many people thought they were. And, people basically try to get their capital out of that currency and into a new currency, into a stronger form of money. Post Bretton Woods, this is basically in think of it concurrent with the world wars and kind of this new global order. The U.S. government emerges as this hegemon, and the U.S. government said, we are going to we will take all of your gold for these other foreign countries. We will hold your gold, and you can convert your currencies to dollars, and then we'll give you dollars, but the dollar's always backed by a set amount of gold. This was all well and good, but obviously as time's gone on, the US government has inflated away much of their currency. There's even a famous incident when Nixon was president where the French government sent a warship to New York City, basically demanding their gold back because they basically were calling bullshit on the US government. And really, since then, what we've seen is like US government's primary export to the world is dollars. Other countries are dependent on our dollars because most of the debt in the world is priced in dollars. So anytime a country borrows money, a lot of times it's in dollar terms, and to pay the bondholders, they need to give the bondholders dollars. And so that has led to a great period of stability. The US military also plays a foundational role here because free trade is basically facilitated worldwide by the United States Navy. And so it's very easy for us to develop, it became easy for us to develop these globalized supply chains. Through the Euro banking system, it became very easy for us to get dollars all over the world as fast as possible. But that has kind of led to like a hollowing out of the US manufacturing base. It's led to some weird distortions in the economy. So one way you could think about the financial crisis in 2008, 2009 is that there was such a demand for dollars and such a demand for dollar generating assets that basically pressed down the price of mortgage-backed securities. And so there was basically this demand for mortgage-backed securities, and basically U.S. banks were like, oh, if you want more mortgage-backed securities, how about a synthetic AAA mortgage-backed security made up of subprime loans, things like this. But so I think it's led to a great deal of distortions. I think what we're seeing now, and maybe I think MicroStrategy maybe is like an interesting example. Raise your hand if anyone's heard of MicroStrategy. Yeah. So I think now what we're seeing is like different people, whether it's individuals or companies, or in the case of El Salvador, countries that are reverting back to Bitcoin as a storeholder value and as a way to kind of preserve their wealth, maybe outside of this dollar system. And I think MicroStrategy in particular is really telling, in part because the stock has just been absolutely ripping. I hope you guys are like XXX long in your Robinhood accounts, but only with a responsible amount of money. But I think what we're basically seeing right now is like more and more companies are going to look to just store their balance sheet or save in their balance sheet through Bitcoin. But I think longer term, what we're going to really see is just a rethinking of how we think about money. I think time was we had all these like simple adages that rang true in sort of a Pax Americana society where economies, growth is going to go up and to the right. Everything's going to go up. Housing prices can never go down. All of these things. And I think Bitcoin is more of like a restorative type movement where people will kind of, they won't be forced to day trade in their Robinhood accounts to just like catch up and make sure they can retire. I think we're going to see more companies hold Bitcoin, more people hold Bitcoin, more countries hold Bitcoin, and it's going to become this sort of universal reserve currency where everyone knows that, you know, if they store their value in Bitcoin, especially in these early days, we still might see some volatility in the price, but they can always sell that and they can always transport that, regardless of what governments are doing, regardless of what other kind of strange, call it market anomalies that are caused by this fiat system. This really is what's going to change, and it will also have deep psychological effects on people as well. But I know I've thrown out about 20 things at that question, but for me, I think it's like a restorative, positive, like returning to called the fundamental laws of economics, versus I think right now we've sort of been living in this weird postmodern dystopian sort of era where there are all these like weird market dislocations caused by, call it a economy without a foundational reserve currency.
Yeah, so it's very interesting how you mentioned like sort of going back to fundamentals. I was wondering, what do you think sets Bitcoin apart or previous financial revolutions?
Yeah, so I'm gonna plagiarize Saifuddin Ammous here, and so if anyone's familiar with them, you know, just forgive me, because you will have heard this before. But so I think for many millennia, gold was sort of the global reserve currency in a way, and there are some interesting properties of gold because you know, it's one, beautiful. Two, it's sort of scattered around the earth in an interesting way where like most regions had some gold in it. This is not true of all precious metals. And then, you know, there's some other weird like mythical qualities about gold too, where it has some disinfectant properties. So, you know, if you put gold in, generals used to put a coin of gold in a cup of water to sort of disinfect it before they drank it. And so like I totally, you know, gold has like an aura to it and a mystique to it, and it's been around for so long that I think everyone always thinks, you know, if I want to put my money in something that I know is going to last, gold is as good as anything. But gold has some drawbacks. Number one, you know, divisibility. If you had like a gold coin and you were trying to buy something for like a quarter of a gold coin, it's a little tricky. I mean, there are times when people might cut gold coins in half and things like this, but you know, there's stuff like this. There's also a challenge of verification of gold. Many people would say kind of diffuse their gold. They would put other metals into it to turn it into an alloy to basically hide the fact that they're inflating their money supply. Gold is also pretty expensive to store and expensive to transport. And so with gold, one way you could think about it is it guaranteed saleability over time, meaning that like an ounce of gold 100 years ago is worth an ounce of gold, or isn't, you know, equivalent to an ounce of gold today in a way. The value of that has gone up tremendously. But so it had saleability across time, but it was not very good with saleability across space. And as technologies emerged, and especially in this post-industrial society in the 20th century, saleability across space became really, really sort of important. And no one wanted to send over a boat of gold over to a different country to sort of settle a payment for, you know, buying manufacturing goods. It was not very good like that, and it was not, so it wasn't fast enough of a currency. And so in a way, the dollar was really natural, and banknotes were really natural sort of next step there, because with banknotes, you could at least move money around on a ledger or in a piece of paper, and it was much easier, right? Like you could walk around with money on you, and no one could hear like jingling, which is sort of a target on your back. Or most importantly, in the banking system, if I wanted to send, you know, $10 million to China, it was much easier to do that with dollars than it was, say, with like gold coins. So the dollar emerged and had much better saleability across space. It was much faster, but it was not durable. It did not have great saleability across time because the value of a dollar has just gone down over the years. I mean, a Coke was in like a nickel or whatever in 1950. So that was one problem. And I think Bitcoin sort of merges both of those in a way where you have this saleability across time because there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin, but you also have the saleability across space where, like, you know, the first Bitcoin miners I ever bought, I basically sent Bitcoin to someone in China to send me a few computers, and that would not really be possible sort of with gold. But unlike the dollar, Bitcoin will hopefully retain its value much more as time's gone on. Obviously, Bitcoin's, you know, gone up and to the right. I think that will continue for quite some time. But eventually, it's steady state. 100 years from now, when our grandkids are using money, I think Bitcoin probably will be less volatile, and it'll just be this agreed upon sort of reserve currency. But so it'll have that durability across time, but it will also have the saleability across space, and it'll be fast enough to kind of settle any transaction around the world almost instantly.
Yeah. Just pivoting a little bit into Cathedra. Yesterday, Cathedra was relisted on the TSX, and Bitcoin's recent price surge has brought renewed attention to the industry. What opportunities or challenges does this convergence present for your company and the broader Bitcoin ecosystem?
Yeah, it's a great question. So my company is a Bitcoin. We're a Bitcoin miner originally. Raise your hand if you have a vague sense of what Bitcoin mining is. All right. So basically, yeah, TLDR, we buy computers, we plug them in, and then we get Bitcoin out of that. Now, we've come to the view that pure play Bitcoin mining is sort of a shit business. And I've talked on podcasts about this for hours and hours about why, like, the nature of Bitcoin mining and maybe why pure play Bitcoin mining is a shit business and the nuance of Bitcoin mining. But the TLDR is that anyone in the world can plug in an ASIC. And so that just makes it very competitive. Now, in times like this, you want to be mining Bitcoin because the reason why people get into Bitcoin mining is because even if Bitcoin goes up to 500K, my ASICs are still making a similar amount of Bitcoin each day. Of course, this is an oversimplification because more computers will come on the network, but that's really the whole point. Is it's a way to get Bitcoin at quote below market value. But we've now pivoted more into the data center development industry. And really, I mean, we're a company of Bitcoin maximalists. So our goal has always just been to get as much Bitcoin on balance sheet as possible because we think Bitcoin is going to be like a $10 million asset in the next few years. And so it seems like the best way to go and make a trade on that. I think the biggest challenges that we experience, one, developing and operating data centers is sort of, it is challenging work. There are blizzards in North Dakota or things like this that really, it's like really hard blue collar work. Like the real Bitcoin miners are wearing Carhartt, not like Armani suits. And Carhartt, unironically, not like the sort of Bushwick bros in Carhartt. But anyway, so that is kind of like one challenging aspect. I think the other challenging aspect is access to capital. When you're running a public company in a way, like one of the main reasons that you're public is so you can raise money. And now if we could pull off a micro strategy and issue like, $20 billion worth of equity to buy Bitcoin, we would do it tomorrow. But because we're smaller and we're in Canada, there's a little less money in Canada. So the other challenge is how can we get money into the business to develop infrastructure or just to buy Bitcoin? And so I think those are really the two key categories.
Yeah. Just diving a little bit more into the topic of energy. Bitcoin mining often comes under fire for its energy usage. So what's the one thing you think people misunderstand most about Bitcoin mining and its relationship with energy?
So I think one is that Bitcoin mining or energy in general is good. And I think this is, or not necessarily good. Not to get too nerdy, but you guys are all in college. You still have brains. They haven't been beaten out of you yet in Excel spreadsheets. But I think the reality is that like if we go back to call it university physics, and I'm just gonna put my headphones in here real quick. If we go back to say like university physics class here, we think about the first two laws of thermodynamics, right? So the first law of thermodynamics is that energy is conserved, right? Energy is not this scarce resource. There is some amount of energy in the universe. It's sort of infinite as far as we know it. But there's a ton of energy in the universe, and all these different energy. When you like are burning gas or anything like that, what you're really doing is converting energy from one form to another, and it's conserved. But the second law, which is entropy, tells us that the order of energy over time degrades, it decays. And so anytime there is an energy transfer, say we're burning some coal to create electricity, a lot of that energy is lost to heat. So why is this relevant to sort of the energy conversation? I think there's a lot of discussion, or historically there's been a lot of discussion around we only have so much energy, we can't waste our energy. And I think, yeah, no one wants to waste something of value, but the energy isn't really the scarce resource. It's our ability to harness energy and to kind of capture it in usable forms that improves human life. And so we graduated from called like a carbohydrate economy, or originally we were hunter-gatherers. Then we figured out how to make agriculture and sort of control the growth of our food. That was an energy revolution itself because we basically were finding a way to take solar energy, and some of our physical labor, we were able to make plants out of that we could eat. And so that was what we call like the carbohydrate economy. Then with the call it oil was discovered a long time ago, but before we had the technology to really make use of it, it was sort of like useless. We were using the oil that we were finding come to the surface to like seal boats to make sure that they were waterproof. Alexander the Great famously walked past like some oozing black oil out of the ground in what is now Iran. And he was like, this is like, what is this strange thing? And they thought it was like this marvel, but they had no idea really what it was. Post-industrial revolution, this is like the lifeblood of our whole economy. And this is the reason why we're able to have a Zoom call. Then, so that was called the hydrocarbon economy. And then obviously with things like nuclear, we maybe even improved upon that, where we could create enough power to supply a whole city in just one facility. And so I think what this kind of shows is that like it's not the energy itself that's scarce, it's our ability both intellectually and with infrastructure to harness that energy and to make use of it. So when we talk about Bitcoin mining as like a waste of energy, I think it's the wrong attitude towards energy, because humanity and like human flourishing depends on energy, and we want energy to be as like cheap and abundant as possible. Of course, there are conversations around what are the best ways to do that. Different types of energy technologies have different trade-offs. I'm partial to nuclear myself for a variety of reasons, but so I think in general, like it's not that using energy is bad. It's we need to figure out ways to create more energy so that humanity can flourish. The biggest difference between like someone living in as like a in a very poor part of sub-Saharan Africa, where they're going through the forest to find brushwood to basically burn wood so that they can cook their food and survive, versus say like us today, you could make the case that one of the key differences is just energy and the abundance of energy and our ability to kind of minimize harmful externalities for our energy utilization. And so I think Bitcoin is positive. It's not like it's not, many people say Bitcoin fixes everything. And I think that's mostly true. But I think in this case with energy, Bitcoin mining maybe plays like a tangential role where we help monetize energy wherever it emerges. But I think more energy is actually good for humanity. This is where I would disagree with Greta Thunberg, among a few other things. And I think there's also some cases to be made around carbon accounting and some of the realities of say like the green movement in particular. Say like I think a lot of people like to say that solar panels made with Chinese coal are the answer to our like carbon-free future. And I think that might just be us outsourcing our carbon emissions to China, like we've outsourced many other things. But that's kind of a whole nother conversation. So I think my attitude in general towards the question, and forgive me if I've maybe lost like the tip of that, is really just we should be having like this non-zero sum mindset toward energy, where how can we create more energy in better ways so that we can kind of create abundance for everyone, as opposed to being worried about Bitcoin mining using too much energy and therefore, killing the world.
Yeah, no, I think it's very interesting how you're talking about sort of like this mentality shift onto more like how can we create more energy. But maybe could you talk about how can Bitcoin mining be leveraged as a force for innovation in energy use, or some case studies you've seen in the industry?
Yeah. So I think one example is and to go back to maybe the entropy statement, right? So like entropy is a few different there are a few different ways you can think about entropy, whether it's like thermodynamic or with say like information systems. Entropy kind of refers to randomness. I think that the same concept of entropy can also be applied to like energy generation resources. And they're basically, I would make the case that they're higher and lower entropy resources. Lower entropy tends to be more ordered, and in my opinion, sort of like better. It's more sophisticated, more refined. So if you take something like nuclear power, that a nuclear power plant will run basically like 95% of the time, year round, very few refueling cycles, no carbon emissions. It does emit heat, obviously, but on the whole, it's very predictable, and it's like a workhorse on the power grid. If you compare that to say wind and solar, there's much more volatility from wind and solar, and that's basically because the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. And so what is one of the things that's happened is that, and it's not only wind and solar. Like in general, grids are difficult to balance, but we're having a lot more volatile generation on energy grids that's paired with a predictable but periodic utilization curve. I know I just threw a bunch of words at you, but basically people are using different amounts of energy at different points in time during the day. If you we used to balance that by having a bunch of power plants that we can turn on and off, but with wind and solar we can't turn them on and off. And so we're now having volatile generation mixed with fluctuating demand. And so what Bitcoin does really nicely is it kind of sits between those and can basically, it's like a sponge. We'll soak up whatever excess energy there is. And then if there's, big need for energy elsewhere in the grid, because say there's like a winter storm and everyone needs their heater on, or it's the middle of the summer and everyone needs their AC, Bitcoin miners will basically shut off, and that energy goes to the people that need it most. And so I think that's for me the most interesting role that Bitcoin mining can play in terms of helping the energy sector. There are other things too that are interesting where there's a company called Gridless that basically is developing hydroelectric dams, small ones, but hydroelectric dams out in Africa. And they're using Bitcoin mining to basically recoup the investment on the dam and basically like monetize the energy from the dam while they build some local distribution lines so that eventually civilians will use that. And so I think that is called energy pioneering, or this guy, Brandon Quittem, wrote an interesting article called Bitcoin is a Pioneer Species. That is an interesting idea too, but I think so far right now, the real use case is basically Bitcoin mining being a sponge on the grid to basically soak up excess energy when there is excess energy, and then when energy is scarce and people really need it, which tends to also mean that the cost of energy is going up, Bitcoin miners shut off.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great metaphor of the sponge. So just with our following question, are there any exciting upcoming projects at Cathedra Bitcoin that you're particularly excited about and can share with us?
That's a good question. Honestly, most of the thing that well, like we've done some more worked on some sexier things in the past that sort of never came to fruition. Like there's a new nuclear reactor technology or this class of technologies called small modular reactors, which basically think of it as like a nuclear power plant the size of your house that could probably provide all the energy that say Ithaca needs. I think that like that there's technology like that or a company that makes technology like that we would say like signed a potential deal with, where what we're going to do is basically be their go-to sponge. So anytime they go to a new site, if the site's not the call it local population is using all the power, we would come in and use the rest of that. I think that's like it's a fun, cool idea. I think it was 5 years ago when we talked about it 3 years ago, and it's probably still it was 5 years from happening when we talked about it 3 years ago, and it probably is still 5 years from happening today. I think most of the exciting projects we're working on now are just like trying to do the small things right, trying to make sure all the data centers work well, looking at different ways to grow the company so that we can get on NASDAQ and pull a micro strategy and just raise money to buy Bitcoin.
Yeah. So I have one more question. And so I know you mentioned at the beginning sort of all your journey starting in IB. So now when you look back at your career in the Bitcoin industry, what impact do you hope to leave?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the interesting aspects of Bitcoin is that sort of the key innovation was already done by Satoshi Nakamoto in a way, right? Like, and he rode off into the sunset. My theory is that he is dead, and I think that's a good thing. But Satoshi like rode off into the sunset, and I think to really dedicate your sort of life and career to Bitcoin, and I think for Bitcoin people it tends to be intertwined, right? Like it's not just a job. It like slowly, I mean, it's just pardon my French, but it's just a total mind fuck, and it continues to be as beautiful now. In fact, it gets more beautiful the more time I spend thinking about it. And so I think there's like almost a borderline like religious component as well. But I think it's there's a humbling that comes from it, where it's like Satoshi's invented Bitcoin. The very best I can do is sort of to try to like chip away and help in like some small area. So I don't know. I mean, I'm only 29. I'm not sure I have thought through what maybe impact I could have, other than I definitely, there was a while where I was on my soapbox around the importance of energy and kind of reframing Bitcoin's energy debate. But one of the things about Bitcoin is it kind of just again, it's just sort of inevitable. So it's going to keep just its progressive march forward where more and more people wake up to kind of what it is. But yeah, I guess I would just kind of like to help with that adoption is in whatever little way I can. And to the extent we can get more people into the lifeboat, I think that's fantastic. But I think what's interesting for you guys is that you guys now like this, it's kind of an industry now in a way that it definitely was not when I was growing up. Oh, when I was leaving college. At the time it was like 2017 was like the ICO pump and dump season. And I guess we replaced that now with meme coins. But I think the industry is like a real industry now in a way that it wasn't before. And there's so much good like writing about it now, whereas before it was in all these like sketchy internet forums. So yeah, I'm not sure I have a sense of what I could sort of really hope the impact of my career would be. But I'm just happy to help in whatever marginal way I can.
Yeah. Do you have time for one more question? Okay. So, and then now it's the last question from me. And so, how do you see the Lightning Network shaping Bitcoin's future and market adaptation? And maybe you can share the story of facilitating Trump's first Lightning Network transaction.
Yeah, I realize that now I probably need to include PubKey in my little brief bio as well. So in 2021, oh sorry, 2022, I also helped start a Bitcoin bar in New York. I still live in New York City. And we basically, it's when you say Bitcoin bar, it sounds super cringe, honestly, to me. But basically my buddy who was like the first Bitcoin employee at Fidelity, him and his wife, their old favorite dive bar in Greenwich Village, basically had shut down during COVID, and they're like, we're thinking about kind of taking over the lease and then trying to turn this into a Bitcoin bar. And for whatever reason, I think I'd maybe had a few drinks at that time, and I was like, oh, that's a great idea. That's amazing. How can I help? And so we ended up starting this bar called PubKey. I think there have been other like physical locations where they, like Bitcoin centers and stuff like that before. There's a great place down in Austin called the Bitcoin Commons, which is like a co-working space based out of Unchained Capital's office. There's now if anyone's ever heard of Florida Georgia Line, they built a studio down in Nashville that has been bought and now is converted into a Bitcoin space there called Bitcoin Park. But New York didn't really have anything like that. And there were a bunch of great Bitcoiners that had left New York during COVID. So we thought it'd be a cool way to kind of like plant the flag and say that, there's still Bitcoin people here, there's still Bitcoin stuff going on. And so yeah, we opened that up about 2 years ago this month. And at first I helped set up the Bitcoin point of sale because it's New York does not like Bitcoin, as you may know from any time you try to get a Kraken account or whatever it is. The bit license is brutal. But yeah, we had to set up this like ratchet Bitcoin point of sale system, and we use Lightning mostly because it's just faster than on-chain Bitcoin. And then obviously things kind of accelerated. I mean, we're not a massive bar, and the company's still not very big, but the owner Thomas was like hounding Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, really everyone, and Donald Trump as well, just to come to the bar during the election. So Donald Trump ended up deciding to come to the bar and basically pay for some burgers with Bitcoin. It wasn't the fastest Lightning transaction ever, so there's room for improvement there. But that was pretty cool, and I think Lightning does serve like a nice. It's nice if you want to do Bitcoin sort of at a store or with some point of sale, or if the transaction fees are really high on the network, it's a good solution there as a good workaround. I think if you asked me 2 years ago, I'd be like, it's inevitable that everyone everywhere in the world is going to be paying with Lightning for everything. These days, I'm not sure, mostly because I wonder if we've been 5 years away from mass Lightning adoption for the last 5 years. But and we're still 5 years away. But I think it is really promising, and there's a bunch of really smart people working on that all the time.
Yeah. Should we open up for Q&A? Yeah.
Can you hear me? Or
Yes.
so I had a general question about the timeline. You keep saying that like about 2-3 years ago, this technology was 5 years away. Like from your point of view, what do you think is I guess like the filter that keeps pushing these technologies from always being like a 5 years waiting reach of being like mass adopted?
That's a great question. So has anyone read Nicholas Taleb or Nassim Taleb? All right. If anyone wants like a nice fun book to read, and these are nice audiobooks, and they're not super serious. I mean, I understand when I was in college, I didn't want to read it all. So, but if you're ever bored and want like an audiobook or something like that, he wrote a bunch of books. One was called The Black Swan, which is probably his most famous. He's got another one called Fooled by Randomness, Skin in the Game, Anti-Fragile. These are some of the titles, but really, he's a great way to unlearn everything that you're being taught in statistics right now. But basically, one of the things he talks about is how people always like to make predictions that are just far enough away that they won't be held accountable when they're wrong. So I think that's one of the factors at play here. This is why you'll often hear about 2035, like, net zero by 2035. I think that started in like 2017, when all those politicians will be retired and not accountable at all. Similarly, you hear like 2050 thrown around a lot, and that is also conveniently when most of the people talking about what's going to happen in 2050 will be retired or dead. I think one of the things that goes on so the two technologies in particular I mentioned were one nuclear, and then the other was the lightning network. I think both continue to be 5 years away for different reasons. I think nuclear is 5 years away because of the regulatory requirements. It's just really hard to build a new model of reactor right now because you need so many approvals every step of the way. And they're basically like when in 2021, when I was really steeped in some of the nuclear call it innovation discussions, it was like, oh, in 2 years, we hope to have our first reactor. And unfortunately, today, we're 2 years from our first reactor. But that in that case, it's mostly because of regulation and mostly because nuclear is a scary technology, understandably so. No one wants to lead to nuclear proliferation. No one wants another Chernobyl. I think a lot of these risks are overstated, but it's fair. But regulation basically keeps on saying, oh, what about this and what about that? The last time we built a nuclear reactor in America was a place called Vogtle 2 in Georgia. And that reactor took like 20 years and $20 billion to build. And it was like way over budget, way behind timeline. With Lightning Network, I don't know. I think one thing you guys will need to be mindful of as you think about crypto, and I know this is a Bitcoin meetup, which is amazing. It's amazing to see Bitcoin in the title as opposed to crypto. Chicago still only is crypto. One of the things that I think that happens too that you guys will need to be aware of is a lot of times VC guys will like pick a flavor of the month. And they don't do this. It's not like they sit in a room and they decide this is what the flavor of the month is. It's sort of, we're mimetic creatures. We hear a bunch of people talking about idea. We're like, oh, the more we hear about an idea, the more likely we think it's to be true, even if there's not really evidence to suggest that it's more likely to be true. And so I think there's an element where there's a lot of VC hype. And so NFT mass adoption was allegedly, just around the corner. Everyone was going to raise money through an ICO. Everything was going to be a DAO, this type of thing. And so I think there's a degree to which that leads to, everyone assuming this stuff's going to happen much faster than it does. Like if you think about the .com boom in 2000, what basically was happening was everyone was right with all those dumb companies like pets.com, those people were all right, but they were just like 20 years too early. But they were led to believe that it was all just around the corner because of like the VC hype cycles that were involved with it. I think with Lightning, it's tough because right now the key narrative for Bitcoin right now is like the store of value, and digital gold is sort of a played out meme, but kind of like you buy Bitcoin because number go up. And I think the number go up use case is still probably the greatest. I think Lightning will be something that is going to happen after Bitcoin's already been more widely adopted. But until Bitcoin's more widely adopted, it's unlikely to me that Lightning is going to be this like primary way that everyone's going to send. But the work is super important because now anyone that has Bitcoin, it's much easier for them to transact. It's just that like most people right now, the marginal buyer of Bitcoin right now is a boomer in their 401k buying the BlackRock ETF. And so they don't really care about Lightning. They don't really need to know about it. I'm hopeful that Lightning is going to continue to grow and mature, but we just haven't really seen that like inflection point yet. And Lightning is also still pretty hard to use. Like if anyone's ever tried to run like a non-custodial Lightning node, it's like kind of a pain in the ass. And so the most common use of Lightning now is with custodial wallets, where you're basically using like Cash App or River, if you guys are familiar with what that is. And it's much easier. But then it sort of begs the question, like, okay, if I'm still using like a custodian to hold my Bitcoin, then is it really like why would I not just use dollars at that point? And I think there's still like a marginal benefit that you still like the threat of withdrawing your Bitcoin is always kind of a check to make sure that the bank stays solvent and isn't doing fractional reserves. But anyway, I think those are some of the that's maybe the answer for the reason why Lightning hasn't really taken off. But I think in general, the reason I opened with Taleb is just to say, always be mindful of people with these like predictions. I was very susceptible to them myself in college, where everyone's like, oh, this is all, AGIs next month, or AGIs in 5 years. And I don't know if we'll ever see AGI.
Thank you.
No, it's a great question. Also, I see some questions from Kevin in the chat. Should I read those, Rafa?
Yeah.
All right, so Kevin, I'm gonna start with your second question because the fractionally backed one has some context that I sort of missed. But so Kevin asked, do you think the hash rate of Bitcoin will have an impact on the price of Bitcoin? If not, do you see that as a problem? So I think this is a question people talk about a lot. And when I was getting into Bitcoin, people would talk about how like Bitcoin's price is a function of the network security and all this stuff. And I think that's kind of bullshit. I don't think people are buying Bitcoin because they see that we're at like 700 exahash of network hash rate. I think people are buying Bitcoin because they think it's secure. And then more people like myself are plugging in more machines. And so I think with Bitcoin, it's really just a question of like, is it secure enough? And so you don't really know if it's too secure. You only know if it's not secure. Like the only way you can answer that question is that if Bitcoin, say, gets 51% attacked, Bitcoin is not secure enough. But there's no way of knowing how close we are to that point. You basically just know if that happens. And if it doesn't happen, you don't know if we're like not secure enough, and Bitcoin's value would go higher if we had more hash rate, all this stuff. But I think the price of Bitcoin goes up because everyone thinks Bitcoin is secure enough. But other than that, hash rate has no impact on the price of Bitcoin, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Oh, and maybe actually just can I quickly answer Kevin's other question around fractionally backed in banknotes? So Kevin also asked a question around like, what's the issue with fractionally backed banknotes? Because 100% backed banknote is just as fast as a 10% backed banknote. I think the issue is that they call it the inflation from the fractional reserve banking system and from like both the call it government's printing money, but also banks creating money out of thin air, which is effectively what fractional reserve banking does. I think that those systems are what have led to inflation over time. So you're totally right. Like a fractionally backed bank note and a fully reserved banknote are just as fast. The main trade-off is how durable it is over time in terms of preserving its value. And the dollar, at least, as well as basically most other currencies that make use of banknotes, eventually they give into this sort of inflationary pressures, which degrades the purchasing power over time.
Sal, do you have a question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Drew, for being here. Second year MBA student, super refreshing to hear your candidness in the space. Also, I joined the space in 2017. So I hear you there on kind of going through the memes, the cycles, and just everything seems to be immediate, and then it's really 5 years away, and then we don't really know if it's going to happen. So I'm right there with you. It was also refreshing to read your 2024 shareholder letter. I think it's probably one of the most sincere I've read among reflecting on sort of, hey, this is what we thought before. This is sort of where we were not quite correct, but this is why we're pivoting or why we're adding or we're expanding. I read the announcement for the combination, the merge with the partnership with the company as well, this summer 2024. And there was a line there that was interesting that the CEO said, we are excited to announce this, and this would allow us to sort of enter, scale the high growth end markets like Bitcoin mining and in time, quote, potentially AI. So I would love to get your perspective on sort of where is Cathedral's perspective as of now when it comes to AI. Obviously Microsoft, Amazon, and Google are actively entering the nuclear space. People forget that we have nuclear reactors in the ocean, dozens of them right now, submarines. They have been working just fine for decades. So, but we don't hear about that much. But to see that in this transaction, Cathedral is already mentioning potentially getting into AI. Where are we in 5 years? Where is Cathedral in 5 years within the Bitcoin mining fellow Bitcoin maxi here as well, but I start hearing already AI within the literature you're providing. So I would love to get some color within that potential duality and how you think that might how that might impact the Bitcoin mining industry in general, not just Cathedral, but in general, 5-10 years from now.
Yeah, it's a great question. And you know, I think it's funny because 5 years ago, I would have said anyone talking about this AI compute or high performance compute is full of shit. And I think that was mostly because at the time they were. I think it really changed with Stable Diffusion first, and then with large language models that became so effective. Like we had large language models before, but really, you know, the Chat GPT-3 moment really was massively impactful. So I think, you know, first to answer your question with sort of the AI stuff, like if you think about what a Bitcoin miner is first and foremost, and this is like historically speaking, Bitcoin miners were opportunists who basically found out that they could buy a money printing machine, and if they found cheap enough power, they'd make money. Eventually, you know, more Bitcoin maxis got into it, but a lot of the people in the early days were definitely, they're like, no, it just makes sense for me to do this because I'll make a bunch of money. And famously, some of them sold all their Bitcoin for BCH, but that's a niche reference. So then if we think about think about what AI HPC is, in a way with Bitcoin, we have this market, this global market for energy, where anyone in the world can monetize their energy by plugging in a Bitcoin miner and basically selling their energy to the Bitcoin network. And in return, they receive Bitcoin. AI HPC, I think, is interesting because it has sort of shown us that like potentially the demand for that for more compute is also I don't want to say like bottomless, but like, you know, how many parameters will be enough parameters to train a large language model, or to say nothing of if we get into more things that involve like video rendering and things like this. So I think that was kind of just like a wake-up call where it's like, hey, it's not just Bitcoin miners looking for like really cheap power and a large quantity of it. Now there's this other end market as well. So far, we haven't actually made an investment into AI HPC. We're now just sober about the fact that, like, you know, actually at some point this might be something that we'd want to participate in. The reality is we're not going to go compete with Microsoft and Amazon. Like we don't have the money to bring back online 3 Mile Island. Like we just don't. That's not really our game. But eventually, these AI data centers might be modular enough to be similar to our Bitcoin mining data centers today. And there might be ways that we could do kind of like a value HPC play where you're not going to get all the bells and whistles of a tier 3 data center, but we're going to provide you something that's like fit for purpose, works for what you need, and is much cheaper and faster. So, but I think if we're really zooming out, like, you know, going down 5 years, I think in 5 years, our goal is to basically look different than every other Bitcoin miner and basically to not really be a Bitcoin mining company anymore, to be totally honest. I think right now is a good time to mine Bitcoin going into this bull market. You know, we want to get more data center footprint. We want to get more power. But fundamentally, our goal is to maximize our sort of Bitcoin holdings and our Bitcoin holdings per share. So what you know, I think it reminds me of this old movie line, like the only winning move is not to play. I think like right now we're in this highly competitive industry and we have an edge and we're going to continue to work on that. But I think you know, 5 years down the road, I think Cathedral will be looking very different, and it's hard to say exactly how because things can change so much so quickly. But we basically are constantly having an eye for like how can we break out of this, you know, perfectly competitive industry and do something a little more interesting using our skills. There's an old Peter Thiel line. If there's also another book recommendation I give you, Peter Thiel's 0 to 1, I think is like one of the best business books I've ever read. And he has a great line at that competition is for losers. And so basically, if you can find the way to build a business that sort of has less competition, then you're just going to be better positioned to succeed because you know you don't have to deal with like the 8 billion other brilliant people in the world who are working really hard to do something interesting.
For sure. And just a quick follow-up, would it be fair to say that, you know, I'm just trying to understand the sort of the shareholders letter and the announcement of the partnership with the new company. Is Cathedral Bitcoin eventually pivoting to just Cathedral Energy as the opportunities comes up? And again, very high level, or
Yeah.
would the ethos of Bitcoin only will remain within the DNA of the company? And again, just very high level.
Yeah, I think it's more likely the latter. And so like, and I think it kind of I guess maybe to answer some question with maybe some like broader like theses of mine. So I think one, Bitcoin is going to continue to accelerate in terms of its global adoption. And I don't even know if we'll be thinking about like I think Bitcoin just going to seem like obvious and like everyone's going to have Bitcoin in or everyone's going to want to have Bitcoin in 10 years time, even more so than today. Um, Number two, the importance of energy and energy abundance. I think we're just gonna need more and more energy, whether that's for high performance compute data centers or even just or to say desalinate water, or even just to like give everyone in the world air conditioning. Like we're gonna need a fuck lot more energy in order to do that. And forgive me for I think it's my third expletive. Please, Ella, don't tell your mom. But I think the third one then is I think over time um, I think you can expect that things are probably just going to get like more connected and sort of the digital infrastructure other than energy is going to become even more important. So I think those are maybe those are three like foundational theses. I think there are other things that will happen with markets that will be interesting. Like I think Bitcoin backed loans are some of the most mispriced risk in the world. That's like kind of a whole nother rabbit hole. But I think this is one of the weird things about being a public company. In a way, you're kind of like surfing uh you're sort of like surfing all these macroeconomic trends to kind of try to make like the best outcome. But so like for example, if one thing that could happen that I could foresee happening is that it turns out that ChatGPT 5 is not that much better than ChatGPT 4. And it turns out that Stable Diffusion right now is really good, but most people, like the people using Midjourney right now, are going to keep using Midjourney. But like people are still going to like pictures, and we're just sort of psychologically maybe not really ready for some of these tools yet. I mean, I say that, but then again, I'm watching all these like dumb animal videos on my Instagram, like like you're fated, who's cooking, and it's like an otter making you a steak or something. Like I think who knows, but I think we could end up in a situation where like it's a year or like in a year from now there's maybe too much tier 3 data center capacity. And now there's a dislocation in the market. And that would be an example. It's like, okay, there's a dislocation in the market. We know we have enough of an edge to actually underwrite this in a way that other people don't. So maybe we'll go and acquire that and sort of grow into that segment. So I think it's like you can always draw a linear path backwards, but it's very hard to do that looking forwards. And I say that mostly because in 2022, we said this is exactly where we're going to be in 5 years' time. And then none of that happened. So I'm just trying to be intellectually honest.
No, and that's super refreshing. Thank you very much for your answers. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
On that intellectually honest point, is there a topic that you think is really important that we focus on or just broadly in society, but that is not given enough attention? Maybe something you're looking at or curious about?
In society in general?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be necessarily Bitcoin related. It can be.
Yeah, so I think I'll give a joke answer and then a serious answer. My actually it's not really a joke answer, but lighter answer. I think vapes, the electronic vapes are not good. I think people would be better off smoking real cigarettes. But this is not an advertisement to go smoke cigarettes. I'm just saying vapes. I think we're gonna wake up to like vapes being made in China using like microplastics. There's gonna be some I think terrible health outcomes from that. I think there's and I think our general understanding of hormonal health will change a great deal. And I don't think only now people are kind of beginning to talk about that, like thinking about circadian rhythms in a serious way and stuff like that. But that's kind of I think the bigger thing realistically is more so like, and there are some people talking about this, but I think there's maybe like a broader, and not to get sort of like too corny or too Jordan Peterson on you guys, but I think there is like an element where there's like a broader crisis of meaning that's sort of happening right now, and I think that like a lot of these movements, whether it's like, you know, say Elon before he bought Twitter, like the called like cult of Tesla or like the cult of AOC or all these sort of things. I think a lot of these movements in society are kind of serving these religious like functions or quasi religious functions as well. And I think that's why even say like with the GameStop saga in 2021, you're seeing all this this like sort of mimetic warfare happen where you're having all these people are ascribing these called like spiritual meanings onto all these like animate, very not spiritual things. just because there sort of is maybe like a broader crisis of meaning happening. And so I'm not really sure. I don't know if we'll actually end up talking more about that in the next like 30 years, but I think I think probably that's maybe one of the things that still just isn't really chatted about enough. Or not maybe chatted about enough, but I think there's sort of like there's definitely like a vibe shift. I think post 9/11, like the Cold War gave us in America really gave us something to um there was like a foundational conflict that a lot of people in the world sort of oriented themselves around, where it's like the US versus the USSR. And, especially for people in America, it was like good guys, bad guys. I think after that, and with 9/11 and then like the war on terror, moving into like the financial crisis in 2008. And then obviously like now there's a lot of like turmoil in the world, but it's sort of this like fragmented, like multipolar landscape now in a way. And I think things are just going to continue to become more and more fragmented, where it's not really like, this like sort of picture book narrative. It's going to be like complex, nuanced issues, but also with that, it potentially becomes harder for people to sort of find a sense of sort of identity or like a key narrative to orient their lives around. And so I think, yeah, like to the extent there's anything that really like animates you guys, you should kind of just like not think too hard and just go with the thing that you find really exciting. Because like that's kind of as good as it gets. And maybe you aren't necessarily going to get like some like amazing thing that just sort of like falls into your lap. Maybe the amazing thing already like falls into your lap. Who knows? But yeah, I mean, I wasn't expecting to get too self-helpy on that, but maybe that's something I spent a lot of the last 7 years after I graduated thinking about.
Yeah. I think we're done.
Thank you so much, Rafa. for
Yeah.
the time.
Should we take a picture with a drill on the back and like everyone? Yeah.
You want us to come?
Yeah, we can pin him on the like that.
Also, at some point, I'll say maybe before everyone gets up, I was hoping to be there in Ithaca tonight. At some point, if you guys are just doing in the spring semester more of these meetups, I'm only in New York, so it's not so far. I'll try to drive up and come see someone else. But I mean, it's great that you guys have so many people in the room for a Bitcoin meetup. It's way more than I was expecting, to be honest.
Yeah,
Thank
absolutely. We'd love to have you come in person. Okay, everyone, should we just go?